Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I've kept the Heron Neck Light for 27 years now. Sitting on Green Island, just off the coast of Vinalhaven, Maine, the lighthouse isn't much by modern standards. The tower's only 25 feet tall, and the light barely cuts a mile in heavy fog, but it does its job. Or did, back when people still cared about lighthouses. It's July now, the 29th to be exact, and the air smells like salt and rain. The barometer's been dropping steadily for 2 days. I've lived through enough nor'easters to know when something big's coming. Forecast said we'd have high winds and heavy swells by tonight. The radio mentioned possible gale force winds, maybe hurricane remnants riding up from the south. I made sure to double-check the diesel backup for the generator this morning, just in case the solar arrays give out. The Coast Guard was supposed to send a couple of backup keepers today, rotating shift so I could head into Rockland for a few days. I haven't been off island in 3 months. Not that I minded, I'm not fond of crowds or traffic, never was. But I was looking forward to getting my boots on dry land. Visit Captain Jack's for a beer and maybe swing by the breakwater. Only something strange started happening yesterday. It began with the birds, gulls and cormorants mostly, abandoning their usual perches on the rocks and flying inland. Flocks of them. Panicked, frenzied flights. I saw seals too, dozens of them, gathering on the north end of the island, then sliding into the water and heading south like they knew something I didn't. Then there was the flotsam. Things washing ashore that had no business being out this way. A rusted gas can. Half a plastic kayak. A battered orange life jacket with the letters USCG nearly worn off. And then, last night, I spotted a body. At first, I thought it was a seal carcass caught in the tide pool near the base of the lighthouse, but when I climbed down the ladder and got closer, the hairs on my neck went up. It was a man, bloated and waterlogged, tangled in seaweed and kelp, wearing a tattered navy blue uniform, maybe from one of the ferries. His eyes were open, milky, unfocused, and his face was gray with lividity. But the strangest part was the wound. His lower jaw was gone, just torn off. Not by a propeller, no. It looked ragged, uneven, like an animal had chewed through it. I didn't touch him. Just backed away, climbed the rocks, and radioed the Coast Guard in Rockland. No answer, not even static, just silence. That was when I started to worry. I spent the night checking the doors, locking the tower hatch, even boarding up the windows in the keeper's quarters. Something was wrong on the mainland. I didn't know what, but I had that feeling deep in my gut, the one that tells you trouble's already here, and it's only going to get worse. This morning, around 5:30, I took the binoculars and scanned the water from the lantern room. Visibility was low, patches of dense fog rolling in and out. But around 6 o'clock I spotted a shape out on the eastern edge of the island. Movement. Something crawling along the rocks, slowly, awkwardly. I switched to the high-powered scope and focused in. It was a person, barefoot, shirtless, skin pale and sunburned, crawling over sharp granite, gashes along their arms and legs, moving like every joint hurt, like the muscles weren't working right. Then another, and another. 4 of them all told. I don't know how they got here, maybe washed ashore, maybe they swam. It didn't make sense, but they weren't calling for help or reacting to the gulls shrieking above them. They just dragged themselves forward with a terrifying sense of direction, toward the lighthouse. I kept my distance, I locked every hatch, even the tool shed. Then I went down to the basement and brought out the flare gun. military issue M85, 3 flares left, and my Remington 870. I keep it in a sealed gun case, registered, legal, loaded with buck. It's a holdover from an incident years back with smugglers, long since buried in Coast Guard files. I never thought I'd need it again. By noon, they were at the base of the tower. They didn't speak, didn't look up. They just stood there, rocking slightly, swaying like seaweed caught in the tide. One had a gaping wound in its side, ribcage exposed like someone had taken a chunk out with a hatchet. No blood, just blackened, decaying flesh. And the stench. God, the smell of it, like fish guts left in the sun for days. I fired a flare into the air. Nothing. No answering signal from the mainland. No radio buzz. Just the distant moan of the foghorn on Vinalhaven. Around 3 p.m., I heard an engine. Spotted a small craft, a Parker 2320, I think, coming around the west side of the island. That should have been the Coast Guard backup team, 2 men. I was ready to wave them off, warn them not to dock. But the boat didn't respond. It drifted in too close, engine sputtering, like someone had let go of the throttle. I saw the hull bump against the rocks near the supply ramp. Then I saw it. The boat was empty. Blood smeared across the side rail. A boot on the deck. No crew. I climbed up into the lantern room and watched as the fog rolled in thicker now, nearly cutting off all visibility. Then, faintly, I heard something I'll never forget. A groaning noise, low and wet, rising from the rock below. The kind of sound that turns your stomach and makes your instincts scream at you to hide. I backed away from the window, closed the storm shutters, and I waited. Night's falling now. The wind is starting to howl. My diesel generator's humming below, keeping the lights on. I can't risk using the main horn, might attract more of them, but I've barricaded the staircase, set traps on the lower floors. They're still down there. I can hear them now, scraping at the steel hatch, clawing like rats trying to chew through a pantry door. Slow, methodical, relentless. I'm writing this down by lantern light, not for posterity, just in case I don't make it through the storm. If someone finds this, the world may already know what's happening, but maybe not. I haven't been able to get through to anyone. No Coast Guard, no NOAA, not even the old repeater channels on the VHF. Channel 16 is just dead air. It's not interference. I've run checks on the antenna array, reseated the cable fittings, even swapped out the spare handheld just in case the base unit was shot. Nothing. The silence is total. It's the kind of silence you don't get out here, not with this much sky and sea, not unless something's gone very wrong. The wind kicked up around midnight, and the storm slammed into us about an hour later. The first gust shook the lantern room hard enough that the glass in the Fresnel lens cracked. That hasn't happened since the blizzard of '96. I bolted the shutters and brought the signal lantern downstairs. The entire tower creaked in the gale. Waves were crashing against the east side of the island like artillery strikes, and the sea spray had already soaked the entry hatch despite being 15 feet above the waterline. I barely slept. Every few minutes I'd hear a thud against the outer door or a sharp scrape along the metal railing. I thought at first it was debris from the storm, logs, driftwood, maybe part of the wrecked skiff. But sometime just before dawn, I caught a glimpse through the slit in the stairwell. One of them was still there, just standing at the bottom of the tower, head tilted up, soaked to the bone, hair plastered against its face. No expression, just waiting, staring. Not that it could see me. I kept the lights low, but it knew I was up here. It's like they all know. Maybe it's sound, maybe it's smell, maybe it's something worse. At first light, I climbed back to the lantern level and looked out over the water. Visibility was maybe 200 feet, heavy rain, wind still gusting in sheets. I scanned the shoreline and the rocks through the storm scope. The shoreline was littered with shapes. Not just 4 or 5 anymore, dozens. All washed up or crawling over from the south side of the island. Some moved, some didn't. Some twitched like half-drowned insects, others just lay motionless, bloated and salt-stained. This island's only about 200 yards across. There's no high ground except the tower itself. Nowhere to run if they breach the hatch. By mid-morning, I made a decision. I couldn't just sit up here and wait. I needed more information. Maybe someone left something behind on the Coast Guard boat. I watched the radar. No more vessels on approach. The water around us was clean except for one faint blip. The Parker, still drifting near the northern rocks, held loosely by its anchor and a tangled mess of kelp. I took the shotgun, spare shells, the flare gun, and my oilskin coat. Strapped a handheld VHF to my chest with a zip tie and packed my waterproof logbook. I waited for a lull in the wind, then unlatched the interior stair hatch and descended to the storm room, boots splashing through pooled seawater that had seeped in from the southern vents. Opening the outer hatch was like unleashing a flood. Salt air, rain, and a foul, metallic stench rushed in at once. I moved quickly, head low, using the wind as cover. My legs aren't what they used to be, but I know these rocks better than anyone. I made my way across the slick basalt toward the Parker. Halfway there, I spotted one of them in the surf. It was crawling, arms shredded from the rocks, jaw half torn from the skull. You'd think it couldn't move. You'd be wrong. It lunged with the same terrifying instinct as the others. No thought, no hesitation, just raw drive. I brought the Remington up and fired. The blast was deafening in the storm, but effective. The head split open like driftwood, and the thing collapsed back into the foam. It didn't rise again. I reached the boat and climbed aboard. The Parker was in rough shape. Broken glass on the deck. One of the emergency life vests torn in half. Blood pooled near the throttle controls, smeared across the windshield. The chart plotter was still active, though the screen flickered with water damage. I saw the last track it had logged, departed Rockland Station at 6 a.m. yesterday. No sign of distress logged. No emergency calls. It had drifted off course almost immediately after leaving the harbor. There were no weapons, just an empty Beretta case and 2 soaked MREs under the bench. The comms were dead. I pulled the handheld mic, checked the squelch, tested channels. Nothing but static. I climbed back down, checked the stern. That's when I saw a second body, wedged beneath the swim platform, tangled in line. It was one of the Coast Guard crew. I recognized the patch on his sleeve, machinery technician 3rd class. Young guy, barely 25. His face had been torn open and his eyes were missing. Whatever got him did it fast. But what hit me hardest was his ID badge, half torn but still clipped to his vest. Garza, Montana, 3. I remembered him. He'd been here a few months back, nice kid, quiet, helped me patch the diesel generator. I cut the lines, pushed the body loose, and let the tide take him. I took the flare gun and signaled twice in the air, long shot, short shot. Distress. If anyone was out there, they'd recognize the code, but there was no reply. No response. Not even a light on the horizon. The lighthouse light still shone through the fog, dim, flickering slightly, but it was enough to guide me back. I climbed the rocks again and ducked inside just before the rain turned to sleet. I spent the afternoon barricading the lower level with everything I could find. Tools, firewood, crates of spare bulbs. I moved the diesel drums to block the stairwell and mounted a pressure alarm made from an old emergency tripwire. It won't hold forever, but it'll give me warning. I think they're starting to figure it out. They're not just wandering anymore. I saw them grouping up. 2 stood near the front hatch while another tried the side vent. Not mindless, not exactly, like they know the structure and are looking for weaknesses. The storm's dying now. The rains faded to a thin mist and the winds dropped to a steady moan. I spotted the mainland around sunset, a faint outline of Vinyl Haven's treetops in the distance. And that's when I saw the smoke. Thick, black smoke rising above the trees. Maybe a mile inland, not a campfire, a full structure fire. I checked the binoculars 3 times, then once more at dusk. It wasn't just one column. There were 3, all rising in separate spots. That meant multiple burn sites, which meant either people were trying to destroy whatever was happening, or they were being overrun. The backup team never made it. Garza's partner is still unaccounted for, and the drift current would have carried him inland, not back out to sea, which means he could be here, somewhere on the island. Or worse, one of them. I've got limited food, enough diesel to last 5 days if I keep the generator low. Water's not an issue, the rain barrels are full, but I can't stay locked up forever. Tomorrow, I'll try the South Bluff. There's an old emergency relay box there, back when they still maintained manual comms. It might still work. If I can get a signal out on the weather band, someone might hear me. But that wasn't how the day started. When dawn broke over Green Island, it wasn't light that woke me. It was sound, a faint clatter, like something being dragged across concrete. Then a dull thud. I froze in my bunk in the storm quarters, heart pounding. I'd sealed the doors, reinforced the staircase, but I knew that noise wasn't part of the weather. I rose slowly, grabbing the Remington, and crept to the tower shaft. I didn't need to get close. I could hear it, shuffling footsteps below me. More than one. Then the sharp clang of something metal falling. They had breached the shed. It wasn't the tower they were in yet, but the maintenance shack. The old prefab just 20 feet from the main structure where we keep toolkits, spare halogen bulbs, fuel transfer hose, and other gear. I had padlocked the steel door from the outside yesterday. They didn't come through it. They came through the back. Must have used the weak point near the foundation, the one I'd been meaning to reinforce for years but never got around to. I used to joke that nothing but salt rats would ever care about that gap. I guess I was wrong. The shed itself was useless to them, but the problem was they were testing structures. That meant something in their brains. Whatever was left of them was still mapping, analyzing, maybe even learning. That terrified me more than the sounds of their nails against the metal walls. This wasn't aimless wandering. This was targeted movement. I stayed low for 2 hours, watching from the narrow slot window just above the fuel lockers. Through the mist, I saw at least 9 figures moving between the rocks and the debris field left by the storm. Some of them were soaking wet and coated in seaweed. Others bore the look of long-term decay. Gray flesh, vacant eyes, jaws that didn't move in rhythm with their heads. One of them was dragging an anchor chain behind it, its ankle caught through the shackle. When they moved toward the lighthouse entrance, I backed away and ascended 2 levels, keeping the shotgun close. They didn't breach the tower, not this time, just circled, pawed at the door, and stood in that awful half-slumped posture like broken mannequins in a store window. They were gone by late morning. That was my window. I grabbed my pack, loaded with the flare gun, a crowbar, spare shells, and a water flask. I took the VHF and strapped a red distress flag across my back in case I needed to wave it from the bluff. The air outside was still damp, fog hanging low, but the wind had calmed and visibility was better than it had been in days. I stayed along the interior cliff paths, hidden trails I'd carved out years ago with a machete, mostly for inspections during winter freeze, slippery but out of direct view. It took me 20 minutes to reach the bluff. The relay box sat half buried beneath a pile of old lobster traps and a collapsed antenna mast. It hadn't been touched in at least a decade, but the thing was built like a tank. Fiberglass body, weather-sealed panel, with a manual hand crank and a 121.5 MHz emergency locator transmitter. Old tech, but still used by small aircraft and boats in emergencies. When satellites can't hear you, sometimes the old ways still can. I cleared the debris, checked the interior. The crank was stiff with salt, but the ELT was intact. I wound it slowly, listening for the capacitor whine. Then the red light blinked. It was transmitting. Not much, just a beacon ping and a repeating Morse signal that identified the box's origin. But it was better than nothing. If someone had ears on in Rockland or over at Bar Harbor, they might get it. I adjusted the antenna, lifted it as far as I could without risking exposure, then set a flare near the base to fire if someone opened the panel. That's when I heard the crunch behind me. I turned, shotgun ready, expecting another one of them crawling across the rocks, but it wasn't. It was Garza's partner. At least, I thought it was. He was wearing the other Coast Guard uniform. No visible bite marks, no signs of decay. He was limping, blood on his sleeve, face pale with exhaustion. But his eyes were clear, and he held one hand up, open, the way trained personnel do when they know someone's scared enough to pull the trigger. His name was Nolan. Bosun's mate, second class, he said in a hoarse voice that barely rose above the wind. He'd been on board the Parker when things went south. His words, not mine. Garza had been attacked in the cabin. By what, he wasn't sure. Just that the man started convulsing after pulling something out of the water. Some survivor clinging to a buoy that shouldn't have been there. Within 10 minutes, Garza turned violent. Eyes bleeding, mouth twitching like it was trying to form words and failing. Nolan locked him in the supply berth, but it wasn't enough. The boat drifted in the storm. Nolan escaped onto the rocks but had been hiding in a crevice ever since. He'd seen what was happening on Vinalhaven. Buildings on fire, screams. Shapes moving through the fog, whole streets flooded with people who weren't acting right. And not a single responder on the radio. I brought him back with me. Slowly, quietly, we took the North Ridge Trail, where the fog bank hides the approach. I kept my eyes on the rocks, shotgun loaded, ears straining for the hiss of breath or that telltale scrape. We made it to the tower by mid-afternoon. I gave him dry clothes, iodine for the wounds on his arms, and one of the last MREs from the old Coast Guard crate. He barely ate, just sipped water and leaned back against the supply shelf like every muscle in his body was waiting to snap. I asked him straight, had he been bitten? He shook his head, then pulled his sleeve up. Nothing but bruises and a few shallow gashes from sharp rocks. I believed him, I had to. We took turns watching the perimeter after that. By sunset, the island had grown quiet again, but the kind of quiet that's too complete. Even the gulls were gone. Nolan spotted something through the fog around 1900 hours. A flare, maybe a mile out to sea. Red, then white. A pattern. Not Coast Guard standard, but too clean to be a random civilian. I tried the VHF. Nothing. But someone had seen our signal. That flare didn't launch itself. We don't know who it was. We don't know if they're friend or foe. But it means others are out there. Others who might still be alive. We shut down the generator at nightfall. Saved fuel. Switched to hand lamps and oil lanterns. The tower feels smaller now. Like the walls are closing in a little more each hour. Nolan's resting, though his sleep is shallow and twitchy. I don't blame him. he saw something worse than I did. Tomorrow, we plan to scout the island's southern end. There's an old docking winch there, one I haven't used in years, but it's possible the rescue flare came from that direction. If someone's trying to reach the island, we'll need to make contact fast, before the infected, or whatever they are, get there first. We left at first light. The fog hadn't lifted, but the wind had calmed, leaving the air unnaturally still. The kind of stillness that presses against your skin like wet wool. Nolan was up and moving, quieter now, more alert. He carried one of the flare pistols in his belt and an old Coast Guard survival axe in hand. I had the Remington and the last 4 shells. We packed light, water, hand radio, and signal cloth, and moved along the interior path I'd carved years ago that cut through wind-scoured scrub and patches of fir trees, the few that still clung to life on the island's southern face. It was about a half-mile trek, and we kept our pace steady, ears tuned for movement. The ground was soft from the storm, the soil damp and spongy underfoot. Somewhere inland, a single gull cried out. Then silence again. That's been the most disturbing part of all this. The stillness, the absence of nature, no gulls overhead, no crabs on the rocks. Even the rabbits I sometimes saw darting through the brush had disappeared. The whole island felt abandoned, hollowed out. The southern bluff dropped sharply into a rocky inlet lined with thick seaweed and jagged boulders. The old winch stood there, rusted but intact, bolted into a poured concrete platform that dated back to the early 60s. It used to be used for cargo lifts back when the Lighthouse had full-time Coast Guard staffing. I'd maintained it until about 10 years ago, then let it go when we converted the fuel drop-offs to a seasonal barge anchor on the western shore. But what caught our eye wasn't the winch, it was the dinghy. It was tied off at the lowest point of the rocks, hidden between a cluster of barnacle-covered granite outcroppings. It was a small, inflatable, military style, with black hull tubes and a Yamaha outboard. Someone had gone through the trouble to cover it with netting and kelp to disguise it from a distance. We scanned for movement. Nolan approached from above, covering the angle, while I circled wide with the shotgun up. The boat was empty. Inside, we found a rucksack, still sealed. It was military, no doubt. Mole webbing, marked with a faded unit designation, 3rd SOG Kittery. A special operations group out of Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. Maine National Guard occasionally rotates through that joint training facility, but seeing an SOG-marked bag here raised more questions than answers. Inside was a water purification system, a flare pen with 2 rounds, a waterproof case with a satellite phone, dead, and a laminated map of the coast. The map was the only thing with handwriting. Someone had circled Green Island, Vinyl Haven, and 2 points on the mainland, one in Rockland, another near Owl's Head Airport. Next to the Rockland circle, someone had written, "Failed, hostile." The one near the airport was marked, "Try again, Sunday night." Today was Sunday. We looked up instinctively, scanning the mist-covered water beyond the bluff. Somewhere out there, someone was watching this island. Maybe they were already on it. Maybe the flare from the night before hadn't been a distress call. It had been a signal to wait, or a test to see if anyone would answer. We hauled the rucksack up and secured it near the winch platform. Nolan wanted to try launching a flare, but I stopped him. Not yet, not until we knew who we were signaling. The enemy might not just be the one shambling over the rocks anymore. On the way back, we found fresh tracks. Not ours. Not from the infected either. These were boot prints. Wide-soled, military issue. Someone had been on this island within the last 24 hours, maybe even during the storm. They hadn't approached the lighthouse, or if they had, they circled away. Why? Were they scouting? Waiting for something? Back at the tower, I spent the afternoon monitoring the sea through the scope. The clouds were thinning, and the air smelled cleaner, drier, the kind of breeze that precedes good weather. For a moment, the sun even broke through, lighting the lens glass with golden reflections that danced across the floor of the lantern room. That evening, we heard the horn. Faint, but there. A marine foghorn. Long blast, then too short. It wasn't ours. Ours had been disconnected days ago to conserve fuel and avoid attracting attention. This one was distant, coming from the direction of the East Channel between Green Island and the Heron Neck Peninsula. We took to the lantern room and scanned hard. There, on the edge of the fog, was a vessel, a cutter. Small, maybe a patrol craft. No transponder ping, no running lights. Just a dark silhouette pushing silently through the mist, its shape broken only by the vertical line of a mounted antenna and what looked like a modified radar array. It was moving slow, hugging the curve of the island like it was surveying the terrain. We raised no signal. They gave none. After 10 minutes, the craft turned sharply west, retreating into the fog. We watched it vanish. Nolan leaned on the railing, brow furrowed, hand gripping the axe. We both knew what that meant. The government, or remnants of it, knew about the outbreak, and they were watching us. Whether they saw us as survivors or infected was unclear, but they weren't here to rescue. That night, I heard footsteps on the catwalk. I'd barricaded the base of the lighthouse as always. No breach, no storm damage. But the metallic sound was real, light, deliberate, padded. I grabbed the shotgun and moved silently to the spiral stairs. Nolan was already awake, pressed against the wall with the axe raised. We held our breath and listened. A soft knock, just once. We shouted a challenge. No answer. I opened the slit window on the middle floor and peered out. No one was there. But on the catwalk outside, just beyond the south-facing lantern shutter, someone had left something. A sealed mylar envelope, military issue. It was wedged under the rusted railing clip. I waited until morning. Then, with Nolan covering me from inside, I stepped out, grabbed it, and returned inside. The envelope contained a printed message, typed, not handwritten. It was short. Light stations compromised, airspace shut down, quarantine active, trust no signal, 2100 hours, south winch. No name, no identifier, no sender, just that. 9 o'clock. That was 4 hours away. We've made our decision. We're going down there. Armed, silent, prepared for anything. Whoever left that message either knows what's happening or is part of something bigger. And if this is our last chance to get off this rock before the ocean cuts us off for good, then we take it. But if it's a trap, if they've been watching us only to clean up what's left, then we'll make our stand here. The tower's still defensible. The light still works. And between us, we've got enough ammunition and stubbornness to hold out longer than anyone expects. The sun is setting now, the water's calm. Too calm. I've spent nearly 3 decades keeping this lighthouse. It was always meant to warn mariners of danger. But tonight maybe it's the last place that can still shine a light into what's coming. And I'll be damned if I let it go dark without a fight. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.